In the span of a single lifetime, the Mongols reshaped the map of the known world. From the windswept plains of Mongolia, their banners advanced across northern China, shattered the Khwarezmian Empire in Central Asia, thundered into the cities of Persia, and rode as far west as Hungary and Poland. By the mid-13th century, they controlled the largest contiguous land empire in history, stretching from the Pacific Ocean to the edges of Europe. What makes this expansion extraordinary is not only its scale, but its speed. Within just a few decades after 1206, when Temujin was proclaimed Genghis Khan, entire kingdoms collapsed under pressure that seemed to arrive from nowhere. Cities that had stood for centuries fell in months. Armies that outnumbered the invaders were outmaneuvered and destroyed. Compared to Rome, which took centuries to dominate the Mediterranean, or the Persian and Arab empires, which expanded across generations, the Mongol advance was explosive. It moved like a storm front sweeping across continents, leaving political landscapes permanently altered in its wake. The question is not simply how they conquered so much territory. It is how they did it faster than any civilization before them, and why no one could slow them down in time. Long before they became conquerors of continents, the Mongols were shaped by a land that demanded movement. The Mongolian steppe was vast, open, and unforgiving, an ocean of grass beneath an endless sky, where survival depended not on walls or harvests stored behind stone, but on mobility. Winters brought brutal cold, summers brought drought, and resources shifted constantly. To survive meant following the herds, adapting to the seasons, and never remaining still for long. In this environment, speed was not a military innovation. It was a necessity of life. From early childhood, Mongol boys and girls learned to ride. The horse was central to existence, transport, food source, wealth, and weapon all at once. A skilled rider could guide a mount with knees alone, leaving both hands free to draw a bow. Mongol warriors carried composite bows capable of piercing armor at remarkable distances, and they could fire accurately while galloping at full speed. Just as important, each soldier maintained several remounts. While enemy armies exhausted their cavalry after days of forced marching, Mongol forces rotated fresh horses, allowing them to travel extraordinary distances, sometimes over 60 miles in a single day. What would take other armies weeks, they achieved in days. Mobility also reshaped logistics. Unlike sedentary armies that relied heavily on long, vulnerable supply lines, Mongol forces traveled light. They carried dried meat, fermented mare's milk, and could sustain themselves off their herds. Entire campaigns unfolded with a flexibility unknown to kingdoms dependent on fixed depots and slow-moving baggage trains. Rivers, plains, and deserts were not obstacles but pathways. Yet the steppe did more than create fast riders. It cultivated endurance and independence. Tribal conflicts before 1206 had hardened generations of warriors accustomed to shifting alliances and sudden violence. When Temujin unified these tribes and was proclaimed Genghis Khan, he inherited men already conditioned for hardship and speed. The difference was that now their movement had direction. What had once been scattered tribal raids became coordinated operations. The habits of the steppe, constant motion, adaptation, resilience, were transformed into instruments of expansion. Speed was no longer survival alone. It became strategy. Speed and horsemanship alone could not have built an empire. The true transformation began in 1206, when Temujin was proclaimed Genghis Khan at a grand assembly of Mongol tribes. Before that moment, the steppe had been fractured by rival clans bound to bloodlines and shifting loyalties. Power was personal and unstable, rising and collapsing with each feud. Genghis Khan understood that if expansion were to move beyond tribal raiding, loyalty itself had to be redesigned. He did something radical for the steppe. He broke the old aristocratic order. Rather than organize his army by tribe, he reorganized it into a decimal structure. Units of 10, known as arbans, formed the foundation. 10 arbans created a jaghun of 100. 10 jaghans formed a mingan of 1,000. At the highest level stood the tuman, a force of 10,000 warriors. These units mixed men from different tribes, deliberately weakening clan identity and reinforcing allegiance to the central command. Promotion was based on merit, loyalty, and competence rather than noble birth. A shepherd who proved himself capable could rise, a noble who failed could fall. This restructuring created cohesion that transcended blood ties. Discipline was uncompromising. Orders were to be obeyed without hesitation. If one man deserted, the entire unit could face punishment. Collective responsibility ensured that every soldier depended on the reliability of his comrades. Communication flowed through flags, horns, and mounted couriers, allowing units to split apart and recombine with precision across miles of open terrain. What appeared chaotic to outsiders was in fact a carefully synchronized system. This new structure allowed the Mongols to coordinate multi-front campaigns in ways no tribal coalition could have achieved. When Genghis Khan launched his campaigns against the Jin dynasty in northern China and later against the Khwarezmian Empire in Central Asia, his forces operated as parts of a single machine. Columns separated by vast distances moved with shared purpose and timing. Authority was centralized, but execution was flexible. By dismantling tribal fragmentation and replacing it with a merit-based military hierarchy, Genghis Khan created something unprecedented on the steppe. A disciplined war apparatus capable of sustained, organized conquest. The speed of Mongol expansion was not accidental. It was engineered through unity, structure, and ruthless efficiency. If unity created the foundation of Mongol power, logistics turned it into acceleration. Conquering vast distances required more than fast horses and disciplined ranks. It required communication that could outpace confusion and coordination that could survive separation by hundreds of miles. The Mongols built a system that allowed information to travel almost as quickly as their cavalry. Known as the Yam, it was a relay network of stations positioned roughly every 25 to 40 miles across their territory. At each post, fresh horses, supplies, and shelter awaited official messengers. A rider carrying urgent orders could switch mounts repeatedly, maintaining relentless speed over enormous distances. This network allowed commanders to synchronize campaigns unfolding simultaneously across multiple regions. Intelligence gathering was equally systematic. Scouts rode far ahead of the main army, mapping terrain, estimating enemy strength, and identifying weak points. Merchants, travelers, and even defectors were questioned for information. Before a major invasion began, Mongol leaders often possessed detailed knowledge of road systems, fortifications, political divisions, and rivalries within the target state. This foresight meant that when armies advanced, they did so with calculated precision rather than guesswork. The campaign against the Khwarezmian Empire beginning in 1219 demonstrated the power of this coordination. Instead of marching as a single overwhelming force, Mongol armies split into multiple columns, crossing deserts and mountains in separate directions. Cities that expected to face a frontal assault suddenly found enemies appearing from unexpected angles. Communication between these columns remained intact through the Yam network and disciplined messengers. What seemed to defenders like simultaneous, unstoppable waves was in fact careful orchestration. The Mongols also minimized the burden of traditional supply chains. Their reliance on mobile herds and locally sourced provisions reduced dependence on vulnerable baggage trains. Armies could move swiftly without waiting for slow reinforcements. Rivers and plains became corridors of movement rather than barriers. This logistical sophistication magnified the speed of expansion. It allowed campaigns to unfold across continents without losing cohesion. While other empires required months to coordinate distant armies, the Mongols operated as a single organism stretched across vast geography. Their strength was not merely in how fast they rode, but in how effectively they communicated and adapted while riding. Speed, discipline, and information worked together, compressing space and time in ways their enemies struggled to comprehend. On the battlefield, the Mongols turned speed into a weapon that struck both body and mind. Their tactics were built around flexibility, deception, and relentless pressure. At the center of their method stood the feigned retreat, a maneuver so effective that it dismantled armies far larger than their own. Mongol cavalry would engage an enemy directly, loose volleys of arrows, and then appear to break formation and withdraw. To opposing commanders trained in conventional warfare, this looked like collapse. Victory seemed within reach. Orders to pursue were given with confidence. What followed was exactly what the Mongols intended. As enemy forces surged forward, discipline began to erode. Cavalry outran infantry. Units stretched thin across open ground. Communication faltered amid dust and noise. Meanwhile, the Mongols maintained spacing even in apparent retreat. Riders continued firing backward with deadly accuracy, slowing and harassing pursuers without halting their advance. At a calculated moment, horns would sound and formations would wheel around with astonishing coordination. Hidden reserves struck from flanks. What had seemed like a fleeing enemy became a tightening ring. Encirclement followed, and panic spread quickly through disorganized ranks. This pattern repeated across Eurasia. In 1223 at the Khalkha River, Mongol generals Subutai and Jebe lured a coalition of Rus princes into a prolonged pursuit before turning decisively and crushing them. In 1241 at Legnica in Poland and Mohi in Hungary, European knights charged aggressively, only to find themselves surrounded and overwhelmed. The Mongols exploited instinct. Armies accustomed to equating retreat with defeat could not resist the temptation to chase. Psychological warfare amplified the effect. Mongol forces used smoke, noise, and multiple banners to exaggerate their numbers. They targeted officers first, knowing that killing leaders would accelerate confusion. Survivors carried stories of sudden reversals and total destruction back to their homelands, spreading fear long before the next invasion arrived. Reputation became a force multiplier. The brilliance of these tactics lay in their restraint. A true retreat risks collapse. A feigned one demands discipline under pressure. Mongol units trusted their structure and timing. Their enemies, driven by pride and momentum, often defeated themselves. The battlefield victories that fueled rapid expansion were not simply the result of superior weaponry. They were victories of psychology and precision, turning expectation into vulnerability and speed into annihilation. If battlefield innovation broke armies, strategic terror broke resistance before armies even formed. The Mongols understood that conquest could move faster when fear traveled ahead of them. In 1218, when envoys and merchants sent by Genghis Khan were executed on the orders of Shah Muhammad II of the Khwarezmian Empire, the response was not a simple punitive raid. It was a calculated campaign of annihilation designed to make an example of defiance. Beginning in 1219, Mongol forces advanced in coordinated columns across Central Asia, striking cities with devastating speed. Bokhara fell first. According to chroniclers, Genghis Khan entered the city and declared that resistance had invited ruin. Samarkand followed, its defenders overwhelmed despite strong fortifications. In some cases, surrender brought relative mercy and incorporation into the expanding empire. Skilled artisans, engineers, and administrators were spared and relocated. In other cases, cities that resisted were subjected to mass slaughter. The pattern was deliberate. Mercy and destruction were tools, applied strategically rather than impulsively. Word spread quickly along trade routes, submission meant survival, defiance meant erasure. This calculated brutality accelerated expansion. When neighboring cities learned of the fate of those who resisted, many chose surrender rather than face annihilation. Entire regions collapsed with minimal prolonged fighting because their leaders understood the consequences. The Mongols did not need to besiege every stronghold for months if terror could open gates in advance. The fall of Baghdad in 1258 under Hulagu Khan demonstrated the culmination of this method. The once mighty Abbasid capital, a center of learning and wealth, was overwhelmed after refusing submission. The destruction shocked the Islamic world. It was not random savagery, but a strategic statement about Mongol supremacy. Resistance would not be tolerated at the symbolic heart of a rival civilization. Total war, applied selectively, reduced the need for repeated campaigns in the same region. By making examples of powerful cities, the Mongols shortened future conflicts. Fear became an extension of their cavalry, riding ahead of them into distant lands. Speed of conquest was no longer measured solely in miles traveled or battles won. It was measured in how quickly entire populations chose submission over resistance. Relentless expansion alone does not sustain an empire. What made the Mongol advance uniquely fast was not just how they conquered, but how quickly they adapted after conquest. Unlike many invading powers that imposed rigid systems or dismantled existing structures entirely, the Mongols often incorporated what they found useful. This flexibility allowed them to stabilize vast territories without slowing their momentum. Skilled administrators from Persia, engineers from China, and scholars from conquered lands were absorbed into the imperial framework. Rather than ruling through cultural uniformity, the Mongols ruled through pragmatic inclusion. Religious tolerance became a strategic asset. Buddhists, Muslims, Christians, and Taoists were generally permitted to practice their faiths, provided they did not challenge Mongol authority. This policy reduced the likelihood of unified religious resistance and encouraged cooperation from local elites. In regions such as northern China and Persia, established bureaucracies were maintained under Mongol oversight. Tax systems continued functioning, often becoming more efficient under centralized supervision. By preserving administrative continuity, the Mongols avoided the chaos that frequently followed conquest elsewhere. Trade was another pillar of stability. Under what historians later called the Pax Mongolica, major segments of the Silk Road were secured. Merchants could travel across vast distances with relative safety under Mongol protection. Caravans moved between East Asia, Central Asia, and the Middle East with fewer interruptions, stimulating economic integration across Eurasia. This commercial stability reinforced imperial wealth and legitimacy. Expansion fed governance, and governance supported further expansion. Capitals such as Karakoram and later Khanbaliq, known today as Beijing under Kublai Khan, became administrative hubs reflecting this diversity. Advisors from different cultures served in high positions, ensuring that governance remained effective across varied populations. Military campaigns did not drain the empire's capacity to administer, instead, conquered regions strengthened it by contributing expertise. This capacity for adaptation prevented stagnation. The Mongols were not bound by tradition when innovation offered advantage. They adopted siege technologies, naval techniques, and fiscal practices from those they conquered. Their empire became a network rather than a monolith. Rapid conquest did not collapse under its own weight because it was supported by integration. The speed of expansion was matched by the speed of administrative adjustment, allowing the empire to hold together long enough to reshape the political and economic landscape of Eurasia. In the end, the speed of Mongol expansion was not the product of a single innovation, but of a rare convergence of forces. The steppe forged unmatched mobility. Genghis Khan reshaped tribal loyalties into disciplined military structure. The Yan communication network compressed distance across continents. Battlefield deception shattered larger armies. Strategic terror collapsed resistance before sieges even began. Adaptation and inclusion stabilized conquered lands quickly enough to prevent stagnation. No other civilization combined these elements with such precision at the exact moment opportunity appeared. Within roughly 50 years, from 1206 to the mid-13th century, Mongol rule stretched from the shores of the Pacific to the edges of Central Europe and the Middle East. Rome required centuries to achieve comparable dominance across its region. The Mongols accomplished continental transformation in decades. Their expansion was not merely vast, it was accelerated. Leadership continuity under figures like Ogedai, Batu, and Subutai ensured momentum did not die with Genghis Khan. They moved faster because they eliminated the delays that crippled other empires, fragmented loyalty, slow communication, rigid tradition, and hesitation. What the world witnessed was not just conquest, but compression of time itself, an empire that advanced with the velocity of the steppe wind.